So, good evening and welcome to a conversation about COVID-19 and mental wellness. I'm Lisa Braxton, the president of the Greater Boston section of the National Council of Negro Women, GBS-NCNW. We and Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute are co-sponsoring this event tonight. The mission of GBS-NCNW is to lead, advocate for, and empower women of African descent, their families, and their communities. Our program initiatives include an annual Career Awareness Day for high school students, mentoring students interested in careers in science, technology, engineering, and math, supporting literacy and health awareness campaigns, and honoring outstanding women leaders and volunteers. We are so happy to have you here with us tonight. As I mentioned, we are recording this event, so you can see it later if you want to review it. And I will now turn the program over to Dr. Linda Hudson, and Dr. Linda Hudson with Tufts. Linda?
Good evening. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I am Linda Hudson, as Lisa has already mentioned. I am actually representing the Clinical and Translational Science Institute at Tufts. We have a particular unit or department that's referred to as IUPR, Integrating Underrepresented Populations in Research. And our aim is to create a culture and environment that prioritizes the inclusion of underserved and underrepresented populations, from the work that's done in the lab in terms of the development of new drugs and new therapies, to what's being done in terms of medications and therapies at the patient bedside, to the development and creation and implementation of community-based programming, and ultimately to influence health policy and practice. We promote the inclusion of underrepresented population in all aspects of research, from the study conception, as you begin to think about, what are some problems that we need to address, through to the dissemination of the information back to communities. Our mission is to help ensure that research is used to prevent unnecessary, unjust, and inequitable differences in health outcomes. And we believe that our work is best done in terms of being open, transparent, and collaborative. And the emphasis is on collaborative. We have two major goals: to identify and create evidence-based tools and innovative strategies to aid our research teams in understanding how to recruit and how to be able to retain participants in the studies that are taking place. Our second goal, though, really is to create partnerships with communities and community agencies designed to identify and prioritize health research questions of most relevance to the community and those agencies. Tonight's webinar is the result of our partnering with the Greater Boston section of the National Council of Negro Women. And we just want to thank you, Lisa, for your participation in this process, for your helping us to develop this webinar. And we look forward to ongoing activities that we will be continuing to do together. So tonight we're having a conversation, and we call it a conversation rather than a lecture, because many of us learn many things sitting around the kitchen table. And we felt this was the best way to have this kind of conversation about COVID-19 and mental wellness. And as you hear, we refer to it as mental wellness because we want to be proactive and positive about how we move forward under these very, very difficult circumstances. Our guest tonight, our guest conversationalist, I'll call her, is Marsha Jackson. She is a licensed clinical social worker. I've known her for many, many years. Marsha has vast experience providing clinical and therapeutic services for families, children, adolescents, and adults, including 20 years of supervising social workers who conduct case management in the child welfare system. We're going to touch on a number of different areas, which I'm sure you saw on the flyer. And so we're going to begin basically with just a little information, and then Marsha and I will begin our conversation, and I will pose those questions that we can answer. So according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, Marsha, the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic recession have negatively impacted many people's mental health and created new barriers for people who were already impacted by other issues. During the pandemic, 4 in 10 adults in the US have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder. That's up. The year before, it was only 1 in 10. We also know that adults are reporting specific negative impacts on their mental health and well-being, such as difficulty sleeping and eating, increases in consumption of products, and worsening chronic conditions due to worry and stress over coronavirus. We also know that the pandemic, as it continues, is really impacting our mental health in terms of issues such as isolation and job loss. We particularly know that coronavirus can affect children and young people directly and indirectly. Beyond getting sick, many young people's social, emotional, and mental well-being have been impacted by the pandemic. And we also know that trauma faced at this developmental stage can continue to affect them across their lifespan. So let's begin our conversation, Marcia. And so the first question I would pose to you is, we know that women, particularly women of color, are the center of the family. They are the center of the community. Most of us are decision makers. We are the ones that motivate and ensure that the family is healthy and well. And during this pandemic, we are pretty much the schedulers and keeping people on track and moving forward. Can you share with us, from your work and your expertise, what is the role of women in relationship to mental wellness?
Thank you, first of all, for having me to be part of this conversation. I know there have been many, and there will continue to be many forums talking about the stress, the pandemic. I just felt it would be helpful just to have a conversation, just to talk about in a way that is not basic, but not, not academic, but to talk about it in a way that women in particular can relate and understand this pandemic and how to manage the families as well as themselves. So I think what was interesting to me, the first question I had was, well, how many women are the head of households? Where, who is the breadwinner? So I just did a cursory review of some statistics. As we all know, the 2020 statistics is coming out late because of all the controversy surrounding that. So some of this is a little bit dated, but from 1974 to 2015, the percentage of women who were heads of household doubled from 14.6 to 25.2%. So that's really significant. And in terms of salary, contributing the salary or the only salary, in 2017, 69.6% of mothers worked for the salary. And this was that information was generated by a time series historical income gathering by the US Census. So, what that says to us is that, to me, is that there's always a lot of pressure on women, even if it's not stated. In my experience, working with families, whenever there was an issue to be resolved, advocated, clarified, the person we would really look for would be a woman. It could be a mom, but generally it would be a woman. Why women? Because we have multiple roles. We have always managed them fairly well. We understand the intricacies of the family in terms of scheduling, negotiating. The schools, institutions call mothers if they're having a problem with the children. So therefore, women, we're more adept at managing many issues that we don't call for. But those are the norms that society has cast upon us. And I think now women are beginning to look at it and perhaps challenge it a little bit. But nonetheless, the norms as the caretaker of not only our children, but our parents, perhaps our neighbors, sometimes children whose parents are working during the day. We just, we nurture, we care about members, family members in a way that perhaps some, perhaps male don't. And I'm not generalizing to all men, because there are some men who are also wonderful caretakers, but in general, that falls upon the women. We also educate. We also educate our children. We educate our parents. You know, it could be around medication issues or doctor's visits or safety, or any number of things. So that is a role that we don't often perceive, you know, we just do it. And then we also take into account the safety of everybody, particularly the safety of the children, you know, going to school, going out. Nowadays, it's dangerous for Black children to play in certain neighborhoods. It's dangerous, you know, to walk down the street. So we're always worried. We're always concerned about, you know, those kind of safety issues and how we can prepare, particularly the Black young men, the Black boys, teenagers, everyone, you know, about being safe. What was interesting to me was, as I was actually doing a little research on this, Sojourner Truth, in 1851, at a it was a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio. She advocated for Black women. She was then saying, you know, I mean, saying that women of color are treated as afterthoughts. That was back then, and really not much has changed. Some things have changed, but not much has changed. So in light of that, you know, we have to protect our families. We look after our communities. We're advocates. And so for me, when we talk about mental wellness in a pandemic, it just makes sense that in some ways, women are better positioned to play an integral role with the children, with the families, with the neighborhood. In addition to that, I think one of the issues and trends that has occurred, particularly in the last several years, is women taking care of ourselves, the sisterhood, looking at that in a very different kind of way. You know, we historically had teas in the churches and our social clubs, but those necessarily were not venues in which women talked about issues, talked about problems. That was hidden. But I think now we are emerging as being able to talk about difficult issues. And I think that provides a role model for children, for families, elders in the neighborhood.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. When you think about that, you know, it reminds me of the fact that we are the caregivers. And so one of the things that happens, though, is that we are often overwhelmed and overloaded. And so can you talk to us a little bit more about the strength of caregivers? How do we move forward in this pandemic environment, given all the burdens we have carried for years, and under these specific circumstances are carrying even more? Can you talk with us a little bit more about strengthening and the strength of caregivers?
Yes, okay. very important. We have to prioritize ourselves, our health, our supports, and outlets as we prioritize other people. Oftentimes we don't do that. We say, I don't have time to do that. But it's important to make a date for yourself, to, have your own agenda. During the week, we put together schedules for everyone, but we haven't scheduled anything for ourselves. What's happened with some of my friends during this pandemic is they have scheduled times when they get together with their sister friends on Zoom, and they just talk as if they were going out. So to find supports, to find also, secondly, to find time for yourself. It could be, just taking a walk, or just sitting in a quiet place, or talking to a friend, or reading a book, but making that a priority. Also, it's always helpful. We have hobbies and things that we love to do. And so it's important to make time to do something that you love. And, to find a way to do it every day, if possible, or at least 3 times a day. But I mean, those are critical. And finally is to find time to nurture your body, to eat meals. Oftentimes we are so busy dropping the kids off, picking our parents up, running them to the hospital, going to work, that we don't eat, that we don't nurture our bodies. And it's important to have have meals at a regular time. It's also important to hydrate yourself. So, I mean, those are some of the things that women can do, that we don't do for ourselves, because we don't prioritize ourselves. We're the last on the totem pole.
And I would imagine there are many women who are listening to us right now who would agree with you 100% that we know some of those things that you've mentioned, but whether or not we've put them into practice becomes another issue. One of the things that you and I have discussed in the past has been the fact that we are not afraid of emotional language.
That's right.
How important is that in terms of who we are within the family and within the framework?
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. That is so important on many dimensions. First of all, Black women we're stigmatized. We are identified as being strong. We're the backbones of our churches, our social clubs. So many times that does not provide us a way for the outlets, the emotional outlets that we need, but we have friends and we talk to them. And as women, society allows us to talk about emotional issues. It doesn't afford men that opportunity. Over the years, as I've practiced, done therapy with men and boys and women, the boys get angry. They don't know what to do because they don't know the emotional language. And so by emotional language, I mean feeling hurt, feeling sad, being mad, those kinds of things. And so as women, we try to be strong for our children. Everyone says, oh, you really have to be strong for, your parents or your child. And to a certain extent, that's true. But it's also important that the children see that they are allowed to have emotions and to express those emotions. And that's that's critical in terms of mental wellness, because when you hold your emotions in, sooner or later, it, it rears its ugly head, usually as anger, as fighting, as irritability, as conflict, um, all of those kinds of things. So um, society has given us permission to use emotional language, to talk about our emotions. And I think that's something that as Black women, we need to do more of with our children. Oftentimes the children are afraid to tell their parents they're sad, or, they're angry, or they're hurt, because they don't see us talking about it. They feel like it may be a sign of weakness, which it isn't. It's a sign of strength to be able to talk about that. And we know how to talk about it for the most part. And if we don't, we always know a woman who does. There's always someone in the family, or a friend, um, or a cousin, or someone else who knows how to talk, about emotional kinds of things. So that's what I mean by the emotional language. And emotional language also gives voice. It helps us give voice to ourselves. We're not heard by many people. And so as a result of not being heard, we don't use that emotional language, because who cares? But it's important to do that.
And it sounds as though, Marcia, you're saying that we also need to use it for ourselves, but we need to be able to teach our children the value of being able to express themselves
Yes.
and to get a response, even if the response may be, we don't know the answer.
Right.
They know that they've been heard.
Yes.
And so during this pandemic, I'm sure children have been afraid. I'm sure that children are feeling the stress of their parents, particularly if they've had someone close that's been impacted by COVID, who's been ill, who's been lost, that they're in a quandary sometimes to be able to figure out, well, what do I do? What do I say? And you're in an entire environment that is so different than what they're used to. Is there any little tidbit you could give us about how we can best do that in terms of encouraging our children to talk to us a little bit more and use the language sad and fear, I'm afraid, and that kind of thing? Is there anything that you could recommend for us?
I think children are much more astute and sensitive than we are, than we give them credit to be. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to convey that it's okay if you have all of these strange feelings, or if you have all of these feelings, it's okay. Let's talk about it, or let's draw a picture. Sometimes it's a lot easier for children to express themselves through art. So that's what I would recommend, really, for children, or play word games, or children learn through play. It's a safe way to learn, because it doesn't, they're not the focus. The game is the focus. So a word game. You could play a word game, a feeling word game. In fact, in therapy, sometimes we do that. We have cards and we use feeling cards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you so much. So we're talking a little bit more about children, and a lot of the data are telling us that children and young people are experiencing a number of different things which we as parents need to know a little bit more about, and make sure that we recognize it in such a way that we can identify it as something specific to the fact that there's a reaction going on, that's something taking place. And so some of the challenges children and young people face during COVID-19, according to CDC, relate to changes in their routine, having to physically distance from family and friends, breaks in their learning environment, breaks in their continuity of care, just as we as adults have sometimes had to change our continuity of care. Children who are used to getting regular visits realize that they're missing some of their visits. They're missing vacation, milestones, other kinds of things. Can you talk with us a little bit more about the idea of those behavioral indicators that we need to be mindful of, and how we can address them, or at least begin to think about them and approach them from a position of confidence rather than ignoring them out of a position of fear?
Okay.
Oh, before you begin, I'm sorry. For those of you who are listening, you can use your chat box if you want to put some questions in there. We will have a Q&A at the end of today's session. But we want to put them in here, and any questions that we're not able to get to, because we're going to be sending you back a post-webinar email. For all of you who have registered, we'll be able to put some answers there should we not be able to get to them tonight. But I wanted to remind you that the chat box is there. Sorry, Marcia, for the interruption.
That's all right.
Share with us a little bit more about those behavioral indicators and how we need to approach them.
Okay. So the first thing that is really important is, when do you notice a behavior change? It could be a subtle change. It's usually a subtle change. Usually it begins, and you look at your child or the neighbor, and you say, something's a little different. Oftentimes, and with every child, it's different. I mean, some children become quieter. Some children become a little more irritable. Some become engage in more arguments. Some become more defiant. Some become more isolative. Some children sleep. Some children don't have energy. Some children bedwet. Some children show regressive behaviors. But really the key indicator is, when did you notice a change? And not only when did you notice a change, but did you talk to your child about that? And to be real mindful about the language. And by saying, I noticed that all of a sudden you just seem a little more antsy or irritable, and I'm really concerned, because that is not typical of your behavior. So as you describe the behavior, try not to use negative language, because that, negative language doesn't encourage further discussion. They don't want to be seen as bad. Kids want to be good, particularly children between 5 and 12. Parents are, omnipresent. They idolize parents, so they don't want to be doing anything bad. So avoid using negative words to describe behavior. And sometimes just ask them, what happened? I'm worried about you. I've noticed a difference. You're not eating more. You leave the table, or you fall asleep.
And when they begin to share those responses with you, and sometimes they may not have the exact language, then we have to think about the next step in terms of, how do we anticipate a way to be able to help them with the challenge and the struggle they're facing. First, in terms of being able to acknowledge it and give it language. And then secondly, what do they do about it? And
Mhm.
so what would you say to that parent that says, okay, my child says he's unhappy or he's irritable or he feels uncomfortable or he's edgy? What do we do at that next step in terms of helping them to get to some place of normalcy in this very challenging time?
Well, one is you acknowledge their feelings. Secondly, you acknowledge that, this is a very unusual time. It's really a sort of, it's in some ways a disaster, but there's nothing concrete that you can identify. All kids know is that the people are wearing masks and that they hear about a lot of people dying. Um, and so to acknowledge that this is a very difficult time and that you want, whenever you're feeling like that, let's talk about it, or I want you to draw a picture for me. And we can talk about it. Just engage with kids that way. If in the course of doing that, you find that you have some real serious concerns, or your child says, well, I'm so depressed, I'm so sad, I just don't want to be here anymore. You know, what you want to do is ask how long they've been thinking about that, and do they have a plan? And then to get some help.
Okay.
Kids oftentimes, believe it or not, think about they don't want to live.
Hmm.
It's a very stressful time for them. Because just to put in perspective, I was thinking about this in preparation for this talk. Children's lives have really been upended. Children grow in play. Children grow in structure. They need structure. They need predictability. And that most of the children had that in school in some way.
Mhm.
And what's happened during this pandemic is sometimes they're in school and sometimes they're not. Parents' lives have been upended. Parents perhaps lost their jobs, or they're working erratic hours, they're not available for the children. So the children are there and they don't feel safe. They don't know who to go to. They don't want to tell their parents because they know their parents have to work. So this is a very unsettling time for children. And I think what parents can do is try to find some structure in the house with them, no matter what your schedule is. If it's, maybe calling them the same time every day,
Hmm.
as opposed to texting.
Mhm.
Why do I say as opposed to texting? Because there is something about the human voice that is important for kids. All of this technology, it just sanitizes everything. And when children don't have that interaction, don't feel comfortable doing that, they need to hear that, the human voice. So I would say, schedule a time to call them. Um, Maybe find a little activity in the house that you can do together, read to them at bedtime. And it could be, 3 times a week, whenever you can do it, but develop some sort of structure that your child can look toward.
Right. Great. Go
Now,
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, now with adolescents, that's a different story. Um, Adolescents are trying to understand themselves, gain some independence from their parents. So they are really reticent about talking about concerns that they have. So when you're concerned about your adolescents, it's important that you as a parent be a little more forthcoming and provide some of that language, that emotional language that they don't want to talk about. To let them know, you'd rather be talking with your friends, but let's try talking. Let's see if we can talk this out.
Great, great, great advice. Great advice in terms of dealing with children and talking with them, particularly under this difficult environment. We have several comments in the, we have several comments in the chat. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump to that for a minute.
Okay.
Someone brought up the idea of the importance of physical exercise to improve mental wellness during this stressful time. What is your take on that?
I totally agree. Yes, definitely walking. If not, turn on the television and do exercises or Zoom. Mop your floor. I know a lot of us hate to do that, but that is physical exercise. And it's important. It's actually, exercise is one of the antidotes to depression, movement. So it is important to engage in some sort of physical activity every day if you possibly can.
Great. I have another question in the chat box. There is an older woman who feels isolated, working remotely, not exercising, not eating properly, fearful of getting sick, as many of us are. This could describe almost everyone I know at this point. I am looking for coping strategies to get through this. What would you say to someone sitting in front of you right now, Marcia, who presented this way? They're working remotely, not exercising, not eating properly, fearful of getting sick, an older woman. What are some coping strategies that can help push them through this place?
Well, I would say develop a schedule for yourself. And it doesn't have to be as rigid, perhaps, as a schedule for a child would be. But develop a schedule, getting up a certain time each day, physical activity. I don't know how able, this person is, but perhaps choose an area in the house where you do a little cleaning or you do a little moving around. A couple of times a week, go online and look up exercises. They have guided exercises. So that's one thing. That's one way to cope. Yoga is also very helpful. I mean, I did yoga after I was kind of getting claustrophobic. And I got up in the morning, I opened my windows, I found the, free yoga on television, and I did that, and I felt incredible afterwards. Eating is important. Eating is very important. Make time for that. Eating, particularly as we age, because I'm aging, it's important to provide our body with fuel. And that's what food is. It's important as we age to drink water. That keeps our body purified and removes the toxins. And then, in terms of isolation, call someone, talk on the telephone. I know that it sounds like, you work online. I don't know if you do Zooms with your friends, but I would call them and have a conversation. That's what I do. I was Zoomed out 2 or 3 months into this. I told my friends I can't do the Zoom, but we talk on the phone. So those are some strategies that, that I would suggest.
Well, one of the things I would say is that we wanted to talk a little bit about maintaining wellness.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about grounding exercises. We talked somewhat about mindfulness.
Mhm.
And so could you continue on this conversation, on this pathway, regarding your thoughts about mindfulness, your thoughts about those grounding exercises? We talked a little bit about breathing. Can you share with us a
Mhm.
little bit more about your expertise and your practice around those kinds of things?
Okay. All right. All right. So in terms of maintaining mental wellness, I think first of all, it's important to nourish yourself, to drink water. Okay. Um, and to eat. And I think that's why there are so many food pantries that are available everywhere. Don't be embarrassed to use them. That's what they're there for. That's part of taking care of yourself. Now, the other is there are some techniques, and these are just techniques that I happen to like because they're very easy. Most of us walk around with it all the time. So the first I would say, and first of all, what is grounding? Grounding is a way um, to help you calm down from an emotional state. If you're feeling like really upset or you're really angry, I have to do something. Oftentimes we talk about grounding. Okay. So what do we do every day? I mean, our livelihood depends on this, is breathing. So breathing is something that we can do. You can do deep breathing, and you do it slowly. You inhale through your nose, or you inhale through your mouth and you exhale through your nose. And what you will find is that when you're angry, or particularly when you become upset or anxious, your breathing goes higher and higher. It goes to your chest. So what you want to do is get that breathing back to the stomach. Okay. And that means breathing slowly. You can go online, and there's plenty of YouTubes, there's plenty of kind of exercises. But I like that because we breathe. I mean, we have to breathe. That's our livelihood. And it calms you down. It does calm a person down. Okay. The other one I like is water, because we carry water. Many of us carry water with us. We drink water all the time. But what we do is we gulp it down. If you, mindfulness, very briefly, in terms of water, is experiencing it in the moment. Like if you have a bottle of water and it's cool, you put your hand on it, you focus on the temperature of that water in the bottle. And then you lift it, you focus on every single step when the water touches your mouth, as it goes on your tongue. How do you experience that? You experience it as it's cold or warm. And then how does it go down your throat? You can feel it going all the way down your throat. And so when you do that, you're slowing that process down. But the other thing you're doing is you're distracting yourself because you're focusing on the water. And so if you're upset, that will help you. I mean, that will help you in the moment. So those are just a couple of the grounding exercises that I really like to do because they're easy. No one knows you're doing it. Some interventions, clients say, oh, no, I don't, no, I don't want to do that. No one knows you're doing this, but it's very, very helpful for both you and your children. Can't hear you.
Excellent. I will be trying that going forward. We have a question in the chat box. Do you think women of color may be putting off their medical appointments because of handling so many responsibilities during this pandemic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why at the beginning, when we were talking about caregiving, I indicated that it's important that just as you schedule for your family at the beginning of the week, you schedule for yourself. And now in many doctors' offices, you can tell them the times that work for you. And if that time doesn't work for you, maybe you should find a doctor or a practitioner, that fits in your schedule. But it's important to take care of yourself medically. When you're flying, what's the first thing they say? When the plane, if you're with your family, put your mask on first, right? And then you can help other people. So the same goes with our medical care. It's take your child to work today, take your child to the doctor, take your husband or boyfriend to the doctor, take your parent to the doctor, but we have to get ourselves there. Also, there are times when we know it's going to be a difficult appointment. Ask a friend to go with you, because perhaps they will be able to see, hear some things that you won't be able to hear because you're anxious about it. But again, this is COVID. I don't know, some practices are saying don't bring anyone, but you can bring someone as an advocate, I would suppose.
Yes, I've done that recently myself. I went with someone as an advocate to a practitioner's office that said only the person that's going to be seen that day should be in the waiting room. But when I explained the situation, they were like, fine.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to advocate for yourself. This is another time in which advocating for oneself is an important aspect, and testing the waters. What can you do without making assumptions? I know that some of my colleagues in other areas in oncology and cancer care and what have you are really promoting the idea that we have to maintain those regular screening appointments.
Absolutely.
That many of us have not been taking advantage of, the mammograms, the pap smears, whatever. And they're really encouraging people to come back in. There are safeguards, there are safety measures being taken. I know that this question was specific to handling so many responsibilities, and I think you clearly have answered that. But I also want to encourage those who may be listening that so many of our practitioners are looking for us to come back in for those regularly scheduled appointments and those treatments that we need to be getting. Before we move on I want to talk with you a little bit about just that issue of appointments. And you and I have had conversations around telehealth, telemedicine. It's not something that people use normally on average. And so I wanted to get your take on that. But before we do, I missed a question. Oh, someone has indicated I've found that you can accompany them via speakerphone during the appointment also. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I hadn't thought about that, but here's another recommendation, actually from Lisa. You can accompany people by speakerphone, and so you can take your cell phone with you. We had another question that occurred earlier on, and that was, Marcia, when we started this process, we talked about the fact of the historical role of Black women, specifically, in terms of being the center and the caregiver. And we talked a little bit more about the caretaker role. So we had a question that asked whether or not this role of female caretaker is more specific to Black women or Latinx female heads of households as compared to other racial minority groups like Native American or Asians. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it's the same. Having worked, in hospital settings, working with families, I think cross ethnic groups, there's a lot of caregiving. I think for us, for people of color, it's a little more intense because the hospitals often don't avail you of all the supports that you can get by way of your health insurance. So that's a question that, if you're having difficulty at home managing something, you need to be proactive and inform your doctor. I need help doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so I want to kind of move us on to this last section, which is the use of telemedicine and telehealth, and figure out a little bit more because we only have a few minutes left. We started a little bit late, so I'm hoping that people can stay on a few minutes more. What do we do? How do you look at this issue of telemedicine or telehealth, and whether or not it's something that's used in your practice or by your colleagues?
Okay. All right. I must say that currently I do therapy on a part-time basis. And when I began this, I was really skeptical about, will this work? And what I found is for some people, it works. Others will tell you, no teletherapy. Let's talk on the phone. So I was really amazed. There was a client, and we worked through quite a bit online, and it was helpful to her. I have a young lady who has a cognitive impairment, and it works online. So it can work. If it doesn't, work like the teletherapy, people talk on the phone. It's helpful. It does. Now, in terms of providers, I've done some online, and there are some that I go into the hospital because there's only for certain, specialties or issues, you need to be seen in person. So I go to the hospital. Hospitals are probably the cleanest places some of the cleanest places. And I go early after it has been open. So anyway, that's my view. Telehealth does work for some people, okay? Be it online or be it on the phone.
And that's and when we're talking about telehealth, we were thinking specifically about therapeutic, perhaps cognitive behavioral therapy, or an opportunity to talk with someone. There are so many companies now that have, emerged as a result of the pandemic. And so I assume we would have to be careful.
Absolutely.
Recommendations or some referrals, but that is not anything that we need to be particularly afraid of or overly concerned, because if you don't like it, you can just hang up or you can terminate it. Right. I have one last question here before we turn it back to Lisa and kind of bring this particular webinar to a close. We hope to do a few more in the future, but there was a question regarding emotional language. There isn't always someone available to express your emotions. So then what do we do? How do we
journal?
Please.
Journaling, writing it down. Years ago, there were diaries. You don't hear about diaries anymore, but those diaries really served a purpose. And so if there is no one around, get yourself a journal and write in the journal. And, and then when you are able to, you can share that with someone to talk about. Or you could, bring that to therapy to talk about. I had a client, this was a teenager who we met face to face, and she encountered some difficult issues. And after we worked through them, about 8 months later, she read me her journal entries that she had written. And it was helpful to her.
Very good journaling. Excellent. So, Marcia, I want to thank you for your time with us today, for this conversation, kind of sitting around a table and having a conversation with someone who's doing work in this area on a regular basis. One of the things I want to share with all of our participants today is that we will be sending out a post-webinar email to you based upon the email that you used to register. And we'll be sending you out some hints and tips and other links that you can look at to help you on this journey of maintaining your mental wellness during this COVID environment. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it back over to you and thank you for working with us on putting this webinar together and to give you the final words as we close out tonight's webinar.
Well, thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. Such a great conversation, such a great discussion. Dr. Linda Hudson, thank you so much. Marsha Jackson, thank you for all of your information, your insight on so many different issues involving mental wellness. The Greater Boston section of the National Council of Negro Women has some upcoming events. Later this month, we are co-sponsoring an event for African American Women's Fitness Month. And in May, we are co-sponsoring a panel discussion, COVID-19 from virus to vaccine, all you need to know. So please check our website for updates. That's gbsncnw.org. I'd like to thank everyone for being here with us tonight. Good night.
Thank you for having me.
Good night.
Bye-bye.